Hello and welcome back to lesson 51. Okay, in this lesson and the next lesson we're going to go over making the borders, like the borders on the outfit, to make it stand out better. So all we're going to do is bring in a plane, rotate it, and we're going to now use the lines on the torso to now use and extrude this plane along like so. Now I don't want to extrude it too small or too big because we are going to, I don't really want it to be too high poly either, so we may have to adjust it later on. However, we're going to go over some different types of workflow, which is good, which is bad, and just basically explaining a bit about the model and what I'm doing. So as we're going through, I'm just extruding the edges on to each plane and bringing it down. We're going to now add a mirror modifier. We make sure the origin point, when you bring in any objects, when you're working on a model, is always to keep it nice and clean. Just keep the origin point in the center. This could cause issues if you do not, like later on in the model, if you ever need to come back and edit it. So, and also on your object properties there, on the little orange square box on over to the right, you can, if you can't see your planes very well, you can tick the box that says in front, or you can tick the box that says wireframes. Sometimes I use that now and again, or you can just go to X-ray mode and you can then use it like that, like we did previously for the armor pieces of the model. So I'm just going over bit by bit, as you can see, just extruding each part, making sure my snapping tool is turned on to face, and then going over and then re-snapping all the verts, making sure it's up against the body. So the lines that we did previously on the body are just guidelines on where I want to place the border lines, the border for the piece of clothing we created. I'm going to talk a bit about the piece of clothing we created. You might say, oh, how come you're not putting this on the piece of clothing going around? Good question. I'm just also showing and demonstrating another way of making it a little more, a bit better in accuracy, doing it like this. But then again, if you've masked it and pulled it out, it's not going to be quite accurate for the piece of clothing. It really depends, and the way I was doing here, I wouldn't say it's necessarily the quickest workflow. I really don't think it is. The right way to do it is probably bring up the piece of clothing and then do the borderline along the piece of clothing. There is another way of doing this actually really quickly, and that's actually selecting the entire edge loop on the outside of the clothing, duplicating that, turning it into a curve, add 3D depth onto it, and then you can use checker D to select and to remove all the high topology, and probably then use subdivision surface, and that would do the trick quite nicely. I think that is actually the fastest I've found out of multiple ways of doing it. However, in a lot of companies, I've also done a lot of research. I've sort of seen a lot of artists also do this like this, extruding it and modeling it like this. If it's not too bad, if you want it to be high poly, this is a fantastic way of doing it. Because now I've put it onto the body and not the clothing, you can now see the gold borders are levitating off the edge of the piece of clothing. Now this really depends where you want the borders. Now you can have them on the actual clothing, like what I'm doing now, or you can have it like hanging half off or completely off. It's really up to you. So there is multiple ways of doing it, and depending on how you're going to do it is all dependent. It's all completely personal preference. And then we can make sure our mirror modifier is turned on and clipping's also turned on, so we can go to the center there and clip it together. So as from this point, we will then add, there's a couple of things you can do. If you place it onto the object like this, you can use shrink wrap, and then you can subdivision surface, and then use a solidify modifier, and that will just bring the depth out. And on the solidify modifier, say for example if it is a low poly avatar you're making, then I'd probably turn the trim on. There's a little tick box underneath, I'll probably show that when I get to that. It just it just won't put the back facing on the other side, which will definitely lower the poly count for your end project. Something that won't be seen when you're using the avatar, unless you're inside the avatar itself. It's always good to make sure your avatar or your game character is always at good performance, and this definitely helps for any sort of platform either. So as we're going over here, now I am just selecting each vert and moving him up onto the piece of clothing. There's a couple of ways of doing this. You can just grab it and move it up. You could actually select the whole row and then move it all the way up. You can actually use the snapping tool to align and snap all the verts to the piece of clothing, which is actually a very clever idea. But for those that aren't too sure on how to do that, there's many ways that you can do this, and this video, I'm hoping this is a bit of a guidance on multiple ways on how you could do different types of clothing to many pieces of armor or different designs or fashion that you might have in mind. So as you can see, there is different ways of doing things. If there's, say, like for example, a complex piece of clothing, it's like a flower, and you want to attach it to the outfit, or something like a nice pattern, and you want to make sure you want to shrink wrap it onto the object, but you want it all to be symmetrical and you want the depth to be accurate. No problem. I will be going over that very shortly in the upcoming video and showing you how to do that exactly on the detailed pattern that I have planned to put on the front of the piece of clothing we are doing. So as you can see, once we have done that and snapped all the way around and it looks nice and clean like so, I just put the mirror modifier on with the solidifier and the subdivision surface. I put the subdivision surface up high for now, but when we come to applying it, we're going to have a look at the topology and see how high it is, and see if we need to change it or change some parts of the model, which I'm pretty sure we would have to, because the hair alone could be pretty high poly for what we are planning to do with the model. So yeah, hopefully I'm covering all the tips and tricks here when selecting, turning the modifiers on and off, clicking the little monitor blue icon. The crease is a pretty nice little button, so it definitely helps like bevel the edges. Say for example, if the edges you wanted more beveling, you can just select all the edges on the top half and press Ctrl B to bevel them, or you could just use the modifier if you'd prefer. Multiple ways of changing and doing stuff, and when you're using the crease, sometimes it's good sometimes to use the mark sharp as well. Depending in some areas, you might want to make the edges look sharper, like on the armor, for example, some parts of the armor. But yeah, so once we've done that, it should look something similar to this. I've now noticed actually doing some changes, and I'm going to add the bit around the breasts here, and going to try and make that go nicely into the other gold border. I'm just going to do 2 videos on this. I don't want to take up too much time, but a lot of it is rinse and repeat, and there's just multiple ways you can definitely try out. So all I'm doing here is just extruding in edit mode, going around bit by bit and snapping it to the edge. I might increase this actually and skip it to every other edge, as we don't want to add too much geometry. And again, I'm going to leave all the modifiers on. I'm not going to apply any of them, and we're going to have a look at the end before applying them. Right, I think that's everything for this lesson. We're going to go straight into, and we're going to continue onto the next lesson.